Hey there, and welcome back to the Exceleration Netcast. In this episode, we've got a problem that we're going to solve with VBA. And I normally don't like solving problems with VBA, but there are times when VBA is the best way to go about things. It's not the most stable solution in the world, but occasionally you draw upon it, and it works really well. Okay, whoops, I didn't clean up my data here. Alt-HDR to get where I really should be starting from. This is my second time through, by the way. So what my coworker wanted to do is they've got like a list like this, right? And they want to be able to click on any cell or any row and basically be able to insert a certain number of copies of this row underneath this row, right? So they want to start with this, and they want to say like right-click, add Grant Green, 5 times, and then end up with this right here. And there's no good way to do that with like Power Query or anything like that. VBA is sort of your best way to do it. There's some keyboard shortcuts that can speed it up if you want to do it manually, once every 6 months. But if you do it every day all the time, VBA is the best solution. So to start off with, we're going to make sure that we've got our developer tab enabled. If you've got it enabled up here, don't worry about it. You got nothing else to do. If you don't, go to File, Options. We're going to go to Customize Ribbon, and we're going to click on Developer. We're going to make sure this is checked. We're going to hit OK. So now we're going to Alt-Tab. We're going to Alt-Tab over to a different workbook. This is an XLSM workbook. This is where we're going to keep our macros. We're not going to keep our macros in the same workbook that we've got our data in. We want them in separate workbooks. For one thing, a lot of times, a lot of workplaces won't let you email macro-enabled workbooks back and forth. And if you write it in this workbook, whenever you have a new piece of data where you want to use that macro, you just open up the workbook that you're working on. You also open up a copy of this, and you'll have access to that macro. Okay, so now that we've got our macro-enabled workbook drawn up here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to record the information that we need. Before we do that, we want to make sure that use relative references is checked. This should basically always be checked, and it is. So we're going to go ahead and record. So I'm going to hit record. I'm going to call this clone rows. I'm going to make the keyboard shortcut control Shift R, and for rows, you can make it whatever you want to, and I'm going to hit OK. So now I'm going to Alt-Tab over to the where I've got my data, and I'm going to make sure that I've got this cell selected. I'm going to do Shift Spacebar to select the entire row. I'm going to move over my cursor till it turns into these sort of cardinal arrows here. I've got my first aid symbol. I get down by the little green box, and now it turns into these cardinal arrows. Left-click and drag to sort of move the row. If I add the Shift modifier, if I hold down Shift, I'm going to insert it wherever I drop it. But that's not quite what I want. I want to insert a copy of it. So if I have the Control button, notice my mouse gets a little plus sign. Now I'm going to insert a copy of that row. So I'm going to let go. Boom. And now I've got the behavior that I want. So I'm going to Alt-Tab back over to this guy and hit Stop Recording. And now I'm going to hit Alt-F11 to head over to VBA, to the VBA editor. So the code that we just made is going to be in macrosneo.xlsm. Notice it's not going to be in this workbook. It's going to be here under Modules in Module 1. So I'm going to double-click on Module 1. Okay, so now we've got the code that we just generated, which is really most of the hard stuff. We're going to go ahead and delete these lines here, which have to do with selecting different workbooks, because we don't want that in the code. I'm going to delete that, and we're going to delete that. Boom. Okay. So now this is sort of the guts of what we're actually going to finish with. What we want to do, though, is we want to do this not once, but we want to do it however many times a user selects. To do that, we're going to have to loop this thing. So let's start off by declaring a few variables. I'm going to hit Tab. I'm going to do dim for dimension or create a variable. Well, what variable do you want to create? I'm going to call it int for integer row count. And this is as integer. So we're going to create an integer variable, and we're going to call it int row count. This is going to be the number of rows that we want to add. Okay, I'm going to hit enter, and notice how it changes these to a blue shade there. That means it knew what I was talking about. We're going to create one more variable called int current row, which is going to let us know when we're looping through this, when we're doing this a bunch of times, which time are we on, so that we know when we have to stop. As integer. Okay, boom. So far, so good. Now we're going to create a little dialog box that lets the user select how many rows they want to insert. So to do that, we're going to do int row count, because that's where we're going to end up storing the information of how many rows to end with. And rather than typing in something like 2 or 4, which sort of hard codes, we're going to add a certain number of rows each time you run the macro, we're going to use an input box to get it from the user. So we're going to do input box, open parentheses. Oh, if you spell it right, you'll get a little dialogue-y thing. Input box. Third time's the charm. Hey, there we go. Okay, so there's 3 properties that we want to set for the input box. We want to know what's the text in the input box. What does it tell users that this box is for? And we're going to say number of rows to add. Keep it simple. If you want to be more verbose, you're certainly welcome to. Oh, and I'm going to actually prompt declare that. So the prompt argument of input box is going to be number of rows to add. It's going to display that text string, comma, the title equals, that's going to be open parentheses, number of rows. And by the way, when it says title, what it means is it means like this text up here when the box pops up. Okay, and I'm going to do comma. And finally, we're going to end with default. And we're going to do equals 2. So 2 is the default. And when I hit enter, it should automatically respace and reformat this for me, so it lets me know that I've typed things incorrectly. All right, now I'm going to expand this so you can see the whole thing. Notice how it automatically made default uppercase. That means it recognized it. Okay, so we're good. So when we run the program now, it's going to show the user an input box. It's going to ask, hey, how many rows do you want to add? And they're going to enter a number, and it's going to put that in int row count. And so now all we have to do is repeat this section here that many times. And that's not too hard. So we're going to use a loop. So first we're going to go hold down shift and down arrow to select all this stuff. Now that I've got it all selected, I'm going to hit tab just to add some white space to make it a little easier to look at. So I'm going to hit tab again, and I'm going to do for a int current row equals 1 to int row count. No, I got it right, I think. Let's see. Yep, it capitalized everything. That means it recognized the variables I was talking about. We're going to perform that step, and when we get here to this line, we're going to do int current row. Okay? So we're going to go through this loop one time, starting with int current row equals 1. And then when we get here to the end, we're going to make int current row 2. We're going to add 1 to it. And so it's going to keep doing it until int current row equals int row count, as in we've done this as many times as we wanted to do it. Okay? I hope all that makes sense. Just to clean things up a little bit here, and this is, you don't have to do this part, but I think it's a good practice. Application dot screen updating. I hit tab right there. And let me show you that again, because I did that a little fast. Application dot screen. Now I can sort of arrow up and down, and I hit tab to autocomplete for me. Equals false. What this means is don't show me each step. Sort of stop updating the screen. Just do it, and then when you're all done with the macro, Control-C, Control-V, we're going to change this to true, so that the screen resumes updating, which is pretty important. Okay, so now that we've got that, we should be able to Alt-Tab. We're going to head over to Insert Multiple Rows. Control Page Down to head over to the place we're going to be working. And boy, I forgot what shortcut I used. So I'm going to hit Alt F8 to bring this guy up again. I'm going to hit Options. Oh, Control Shift R. That's right. That's the one that I used. So I'm going to hit Cancel. Moment of truth. Control Shift R. How many rows would you like to add? Let's add 5 rows. And I hit OK. And boom, I'm all done. And now I can do this a bunch of times. Control Shift R. How many do you want to add? Oh, let's add 4 of these. And that's really handy for the user. And I'm going to Alt-Tab over. Whoops, Alt-Tab over twice. So we're back in macro.mio.xlsm. This is the workbook that I'm storing the macro. And I'm going to be sure and save this. So now anytime I want to use that macro again, all I have to do is open up this workbook as well, and then go over to the workbook that I want to use it in, and just go ahead and hit Control-Shift-R. And, let's do it. I messed that up. Let's see. Alt-Tab. Make sure we're stopped. I can go over and do a Control-Shift-R, and let's add 3 rows. And I'm good. All right, well, I hope that was helpful, and I will see you next netcast.